Hey guys, been looking forward to doing this one for a while now. This is another one of those guns where there's just really not a whole lot of first-hand information out there on the internet. There are a few good shooting videos on YouTube so far, but as far as reviews and first-hand ownership experience, things like that, there's just not a whole lot out there. So I've been looking forward to just sharing my opinions on it because really out of all the guns I've posted on YouTube so far, I would say this one has the most mystique around it and the most air of mystery, sort of. Couple reasons for that. If you're not familiar with the gun, this is a Korth revolver. It's actually a Korth combat model. But what it is a German handmade luxury revolver. It's intended to be sort of the best possible revolver that you can buy. And because of that, it's made in Germany. You know, it's the best of the best, allegedly. The price on these is kind of crazy. Starts at about $4,000, goes up from there for different finishes, if it comes with an extra cylinder, things like that. So the price really puts it out of most people's reach. And the number one question I get asked is it really worth it? So what I'm hoping to do with this video is just sort of share my experience with it and give my thoughts on that question, the eternal Korth question: is it really worth it? And I'm not going to give you any hints, just have to watch to the end to find out. So I'll start as I usually do, talking about the history real briefly. The gun was designed by a guy named Willy Korth. He was a German gun designer based in Ratzeburg, Germany, which is way up in the north end of the country at the very top. Just as a side note, the name of this gun, K-O-R-T-H, in German is pronounced Korth, like King's Court, not Korth. But anyway, he started playing with the idea of making a revolver in the 1940s, actually. And the 50s he had some different prototypes, and in the early 60s he finally released his first gun to the market. It was the police model, and it was a revolver, so 5-shot, 38 special. It wasn't really that awesome. I mean, nowadays Korth is known for trying to make the best possible revolver you can make. Back then it was just a nice European crafted revolver. Didn't really do anything to stoke anybody's fire. In the mid-60s he came out with a sport model, which is closer to this one. It had a longer barrel, 357 Magnum, started out at 5 rounds, ended up being 6. And then finally in the early 70s, he released the final iteration, so to speak, of his revolver design, and that was the combat model. What that had was this ventilated rib up here on top, which kind of is like a python, full-length barrel lug, kind of like a python. And if you notice a trend, a lot of this stuff kind of looks like a python. And Willie got kind of sick of hearing that, so what he eventually ended up doing was the sides of the barrel here, he flattened the profile there, so it's not round. It originally was round. So by flattening that, he felt it gave him enough of a differentiation from the Colt Python. And obviously there's this little guy back here, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is probably the number 2 most frequently asked question I get about this gun. But so in the mid-70s, the design of his revolver is pretty much complete. In the 80s, he started working on a semi-auto pistol design, which I would love to find. It's one of my dream guns, but like the revolvers, those things are crazy priced. They go for about $6,000 to start with. Super hard to find. The ownership of the company changed hands several times from the 80s through the 90s up until today. According to Willie, in the mid-80s the craftsmanship really wasn't there. It wasn't until about 1988 when they got back on track. They got some of their old craftsmen in. There were some legal disputes in the 80s too with Willie and the new owner of the company, so there was some animosity in there. Finally in the late 80s though, everything got back on track and they're still producing guns today. So going in order of my usual videos, I'll talk about the size for a minute. It's really nothing noteworthy there. It's about the size of a Colt Python, 4-inch barrel, at least mine is. You can see the frame size is pretty similar, again, to a Colt Python, Willie's arch nemesis. It's a little bit bigger than a K-frame Smith & Wesson. Weighs about 36 ounces, which isn't a whole lot, but the feeling in the hand is really solid, and I'll talk about the build quality in a moment. But so there's the Python. And then the other gun that I usually compare things with is my old Beretta 92, just to give you some sense of the size. Like I said, it's nothing special. It's a generically sized revolver, really, 357. The build quality on this gun is phenomenal. That is where it gets the edge over anything else. Finish is beautiful. It's a high polished, deep black finish. I would kind of compare it to a Colt Python Royal Blue, except that it's black. It's just incredibly shiny and deep and reflective. And it is just beautiful. Build quality itself is perfect also. Everything is just, it's so tightly fit together. When you pick it up, it feels like there are no moving parts in it. It feels like it's just one solid piece of steel. And as far as build quality goes, it's head and shoulders above modern Smith & Wessons. You know, it's about on par with the old 50s Pythons, which is what I have, and older Smith & Wessons, probably even a step above those. So build quality on these is fabulous. Show you the features and the ergonomics for a minute. The grips actually feel really good. These are nil grips, which if you're not familiar, they're a a large German gun grip manufacturer, probably about the best in the world as far as modern wood grips go. They feel really good. There's this thumb shelf right here, and it fits me really well. Oh yeah, the other number one question that I get, number two question I guess, is what does that little knob do? And I apologize right now for the all the rabbit hairs that are sticking to this thing. First off, it's a black finish, so everything stands out, and second, it's the middle of shedding season. But what this is a cylinder release. Push that forward, and the cylinder pops out. And apparently Willie wanted to do that so that you could do it one-handed, which, I don't know, I've never really struggled with the Smith & Wesson or Colt releases, but that was what he said. I think also it's just to differentiate himself a little bit from Smith and Colt and all the other guys that were doing the side-mounted latches. And also I think another reason might be that it contributes a little bit of strength because there's no holes in here, so it gives a little bit more rigidity and strength. Apparently these were good for up to 50,000 rounds of .357 Magnum, and they would still group 1 inch at 50 yards, so they're extremely strong, which goes with the precision crafting on it. Made of the best steels. Almost everything is hardened, and because of that it is just built like a tank. Another little feature here is this button right there. It releases the cylinder, so you can swap out with a 9mm cylinder if you want. You just push it in and the cylinder comes out. I don't have a 9mm cylinder yet. I'd like to get one eventually. And to put it back, you just push the button in again, which I'm doing there, and push the cylinder in and close it like a bank vault. That's about it as far as features go. I'll show you the sight picture too. Pretty simple. It's a good picture though. Flat blade in the rear, and then a simple post up front. So it's a good sight picture. It's real clear, easy to see. Shooting experience on this gun is basically perfect. There's not really much you can improve on, as you would expect for the price tag and just inherent with the build quality and everything. It's ridiculously accurate, more accurate than I am, more accurate than probably any of you are as well. And not only that, but I shoot it really accurately, which I can't always say about all of my revolvers. Some of them, it's just I think the grips don't work for me or something, but this one, it just melds with me really well, and I shoot it really accurately. My usual 12, 13 yard distance, you know, I'm getting groups like this for the most part. So I have no complaints there. But if you're wondering, it's not really a magical experience. You know, you're thinking that someone puts this Korth in your hand blindfolded, which I don't condone blindfolded shooting, but if you were blindfolded, someone put this in your hand, that you would just instantly know that this was the best revolver ever made. It really isn't like that. I mean, you get the hand feel that it's a solidly made, well-made revolver and everything, but as far as shooting it goes, it's not really leaps and bounds beyond a Python or a good Smith or even a bad Smith that's had a trigger job done on it. You know, there are other revolvers out there that shoot as well as this one and as accurately. While it is one of my favorite shooters and I shoot it really well, and I shoot it a lot because with that strength from the frame and from all the hardened components, I'm really not worried about anything breaking. You know, a lot of the time with these expensive guns, you're worried that it's going to break in some exotic and expensive way, but this thing I have no worries. But I could see a lot of people, if they were to take this out and start shooting with it, they'd just say, really? That's it? You know, as far as the range experience actually goes, if price isn't even considered in this gun, it's perfect. There's nothing to complain about there. And on that topic, I might as well talk about my criticisms, because I always do. I have none with this gun. The only possible criticism you can come up with is the price, probably. But, you know, that's just part of the deal. There's nothing else to fault with the gun. Trigger's great. Oh, I forgot to show you the trigger. Trigger is good, as you'd expect. Pull it back. There's no creep. No over travel. It's a bit heavier than you might think. It's not like a hair trigger like on some Smith & Wessons. And double action feels kind of like a Colt Python, I think. Doesn't have the stacking really, but it's just something about the feel. It feels like a Colt to me rather than a Smith. It's also good for staging. It's really easy to kind of bring it back. Oops, didn't that time, of course, because I'm at a weird angle. But it's really easy to bring it back, lock it, and then go the rest of the way. So trigger's great on it. And actually, speaking of the trigger weight, you can adjust it a little bit. There's a screw here and a screw on the other side, and if you hold them both together and twist the one on the right, you can actually adjust the trigger pull. And kind of a funny story, I tried doing that on one of the first nights I brought this home, and kind of terrifying, because when I turned it, they both turned together, unbeknownst to me, and what happened then was that the trigger just became completely broken. It was all slack, that wouldn't drop the hammer, and I was like, oh my god, did I just break my dream gun? And fortunately, I was able to kind of twist things back into place. It was real tricky to figure out because both screws are moving simultaneously. I was able to get it back into position, and I had some reference photos, so it's back in order now, but that was a kind of a heart-stopping few minutes when I was trying to figure that out. So just got it set at the factory setting, and nothing wrong with that. It's probably about 3 pounds or something. Really good feeling to it. But anyway, I was in the criticism section and I have 0 criticisms besides price. It's a perfect gun. And the lockup on the gun is actually more similar to a Smith & Wesson than a Colt. I'll show you that real fast. Cock the trigger, drop the hammer, and then the cylinder rotates just a little bit. It's not like a Python where it locks up solid. So now I'll try my best to answer the question that probably everybody is wondering right now: is the Korth worth it? And it's a totally understandable question to ask. This is a gun that goes for $4,000 and $5,000, has no historical significance to speak of. How is this gun really worth the crazy prices that it commands? And I've actually thought for a long time about how I was going to answer this question in this video. It's really pretty tricky to untangle and pretty tricky to answer because there's so many different factors going on, and at the end of the day, worth it is just such a personal thing to answer. So I can only give my thoughts on the question and try to guide you in a way, but at the end of the day, it's really going to be up to you after watching this video what you think. But first, there are a few major things I think that are points of consideration when you're talking about, is this gun worth it? First, you have, what is your income level? Second is, are you a collector or are you a shooter? What are your priorities with the gun? And then finally, what price do you find it for? So we'll start at the top with income, and that one's pretty obvious. If you're a CEO who's made $10,000 in the time it took to watch this video, is a Korth worth it? Absolutely. It is the best revolver you can possibly buy. Build quality is perfect. Range experience is flawless. Everything about it is the best that a revolver can be. And if the money is not really a concern for you because you're a high income earner and you don't have to save for it or anything like that, is the Korth worth it? I think so, for sure. But if you're on the other side of the income spectrum and you've always wanted a really nice revolver and you've been thinking about a Python or maybe a nice older Smith & Wesson or something, and these Korths caught your eye and you realize that they're $4,000 or $5,000, is it worth saving up another $2,000 or $3,000 on top of that to buy a Korth, the best revolver ever? Not really, in my opinion. Yes, the build quality is head and shoulders above most revolvers, but when you start talking about older, nicer Smiths, Pythons from the 50s, guns like that are really the top tier also, this gun is not that far beyond in terms of build quality. And other things that guns are used for, like shooting at the range, this gun is more accurate than you are, just like a Python, just like a Smith. As far as appearance goes, I think it's a pretty gun, but so is a Python, and some of the older Smiths are nice looking too. It's really not that far, it's not $3,000 beyond some older, nicer guns like that. And in that case, I don't really think it's worth it. It's worth high prices, but it's not worth it, if you understand what I mean. And that bleeds into the second question of, what are your priorities? Are you a shooter? Are you a collector? Are you a mixture of both? Because I think for a shooter, if that's your main interest in guns is going to the range and shooting them, this gun is not going to blow you away. In fact, you'll probably be a little bit disappointed in it if you spend $5,000 on it, expecting it to just change the way you think about revolvers, and then you go to the range and it feels like pretty much just like any other revolver. It feels like a good gun, but nothing mind-blowing. Shoots well, trigger's good, but it's not revelatory in really any way. So if you're a shooter, is the Korth worth it? I don't think so. Unless, again, the money is no object. If you're richy rich and you have plenty of money to spend and you also love shooting, then yes, this gun may be worth it, just because you're not going to find anything better. The build quality is great. Strength is perfect. It's, it can last 50,000 rounds without missing a beat. In that case, yeah, it's worth it. But if you're just looking for a good gun to shoot, this thing can be outshot by a tuned Smith, Pythons. It just depends on what you're used to shooting, just like any other gun. If you're a collector, though, and the things that you value are exclusivity, build quality, fit and finish, things like that, which is kind of where I come in. I shoot all of my guns also, but definitely the exclusivity and the build quality appeal to me. Then it starts to shade the question a little bit, and it gets harder to answer. And that's something that only you can answer for yourself, really, but without a doubt, this is the best revolver ever made, I think, just in terms of build quality. It'd be nice if they maybe had case hardened a couple of these parts just for a little bit of extra pizzazz, but apart from that, there's no flaw in this gun whatsoever. And then finally, my third point was, what price do you find it for? These are kind of rare, so prices aren't super consistent. I've been saying $4,000 to $5,000, but I've seen them go for $3,500, maybe a little bit higher than that, and then on up from there for some of the rarer finishes. And if you can find one of these for under $4,000, I think it's definitely worth it. I think about the intersection of price to value on these is probably around $3,500 to $4,000, something like that. That's where afterwards it starts to taper off in terms of value for the money. And I know you can pay a little bit more for different finishes and things like that, but beyond $4,000 or so, I'm not sure it's really making it up in terms of build quality over some of those other guns I've talked about. So in conclusion, just in case I've muddied the waters a little bit, I'll break it down into two categories. Is this gun worth it or not? Yes, it is worth it if the price is not a big deal to you, or if build quality, exclusivity, collector types of things like that are really important to you, or something that would really appeal to you, I should say, then yes, it's worth it, because it's got that in spades. The gun is not worth it if you are mostly a shooter and collectability, build quality, things like that are really not that important to you. You're looking for a good trigger, good shooter at the range, things like that. This gun is not worth it over a Python, Older Smith, something like that. And then also, if the price is a big deal to you, if that's going to cause you to miss mortgage payments and things like that to buy this gun, definitely not worth it. Just get a Python, get an Older Smith. And to give you some perspective on my thoughts on revolvers, I keep comparing it to an older Python or an older Smith. I've kind of come up with a scale of where I would put revolvers in the terms of a hierarchy, sort of. I would start with 0 is a room, 10 is a Korth at the very top, best revolver could ever be. 0 is a room, 4 is probably a Taurus, 6 might be a newer Smith & Wesson. Older Smiths are probably an 8.5 up. Older Pythons are probably about a 9, and then my second favorite revolver, which is a Manurhin MR73, that's probably about a 9.5, and then this is the 10. So my basic point is that these guns that I keep comparing it to, older Smiths from the 60s and before, older Python, they're all just clustered at the very top. And is that $3,000 premium that you're paying for a Korth really worth it? That's really going to be up to you to decide. It was for me, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be an owner. It is possibly my favorite gun, or at least one of them. Take it out to the range every time I go. I shoot it great. Love shooting it. Looks great. Build quality is impeccable. I have no complaints about the gun except for the price, like I mentioned. So I love it, and I'm super happy I have it. But I can't tell you that you would be just blown away, or that you would feel the same way I do that if you had one. So it's really down to your personal preferences, things like that, and just what you're looking for in a gun. So I'm a happy owner. Just glad to be able to share my thoughts with you all. Oh, and if you're wondering about what this tape is doing on the cylinder here, that's because I got this gun like new in box, and there's no drag line on it, and it's just such a precious jewel to me, one of my most prized possessions, that I didn't want to have a drag line form on there, which it will do eventually. So I put some electrical tape, which I do on most of my nice revolvers, to keep that from forming, just to keep it in perfect condition. Underneath here, it's still like new. So, and thanks for watching. It's a Korth combat revolver, 4-inch barrel, made in Germany.